Good morning, and thank you for joining today's event, Comparing Cloud and On-Premise ERP. My name is Steve, and I'll be your host today. I'll just let you know real quickly here how you can ask questions of our webinar staff today. Just open your GoToWebinar control panel, and under the questions section, type in your question and hit send. You can do that throughout the webinar, and at the end of the event today, we'll have a Q&A session and answer any questions that you submit for us. I'm very happy to be joined by Chris Garrity today. Chris is a director at Terillium and has had leadership roles in both cloud and on-premise implementation practices here at Terillium. Chris will be comparing cloud and on-premise ERP for us today. For anyone who hasn't joined us in this series yet or doesn't know Terillium, I'll briefly introduce us, and then we'll get right to Chris to get started. We are an ERP consulting firm. We implement enterprise resource planning for our customers. A lot of ERP projects do carry some risk with them if they're not performed properly, but we at Terillium are very proud to have won many awards for our ERP implementations. We have a motto that we're only as good as our last implementation, our last reference, and we believe that success that we've seen stems from our ability to deliver value to our customers, and we recognize all of our consultants for their ability to deliver those award-winning services. We do have over 170 full-time consultants. They work for us. They're not subcontractors. We believe in that direct employee model. All of our consultants have more than 16 years average experience in consulting and in your industries. We developed this webinar, this ERP comparison web series, to assist companies like you who might be thinking about new ERP systems. That can be kind of a daunting journey, and we thought this series would be a good way to try to make that process easier. So far, we've discussed how to minimize mistakes and maximize ROI in an ERP project. We've looked at live demonstrations of NetSuite and Oracle ERP Cloud as examples of cloud ERP systems. We also yesterday had a demonstration of J.D. Edwards, an on-premise ERP system. Today, obviously, we're talking about cloud and on-premise ERP and comparing and contrasting those two things. This afternoon, we'll conclude the series with ERP project success factors presented by our president, Dave Woodworth, who's going to lend his experience in some of the things that make up successful ERP projects. So for the presentation today, I'll turn it over now to Chris Garrity. Since Chris has led both cloud and on-premise parts of our company, we thought he'd be a great person to help us think about the differences between cloud and on-premise ERP. Chris, thank you for sharing this expertise today, and welcome to the webinar.
Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to some folks about basically what we've learned. You know, the cloud is a journey for all of us, and as consultants, we've taken upon ourselves to be closer to the front edge of that, and hopefully some of what we've learned that we can share with you today will be of use to those in the audience. Good morning, everyone. Just so you have some perspective on me and where I'm coming from with what we're going to present, I've been in this industry like 25 years. I started in aerospace with Northrop Grumman, and I've been implementing ERP systems as a consultant now for the better part of 20 years. Overwhelmingly, my experience has been implementing J.D. Edwards, so that on-premise application is the core of my background. But for the last couple of years, we've been implementing the Oracle Cloud product, the ERP Cloud product. And so I've had a chance to compare the two. I've also had experience with some other products through the years, EBS for one, and then some other non-Oracle products. But the core of my background is Oracle. So just know that's where I'm coming from, and that's where most of my experience comes. Also, I want to give you a little perspective. You know, I've been at this long enough that I think we're at an inflection point here in the software industry, and it's not so very different from the inflection point we had a few years back. I was with J.D. Edwards when they decided to launch a new ERP product that at that time was called One World. You know it now as Enterprise One. We called it the client server application back then, and that was a huge change. I can remember going in and speaking to a multi-billion-dollar aerospace company in those days, over 15 years ago now, and after about a day and a half of discussions, somebody on the CIO staff finally asked the question, "You mean I'm going to have to replace my terminals with desktop computers?" Took us a day and a half to get to that realization, but this was a large corporation with a lot of very talented IT people. They had questions that they needed to get resolved, and something as simple as, what's this really look like hardware-wise was a part of that. In our technology field, there's always change, and this is a part of that change. And cloud is going to be as big a player as I think client server was in its day. And we're seeing that now. We have a number of clients that have been involved pushing forward on the cloud. For them, some of them feel like it's the cutting edge. For some of them, they just feel like it's the right solution for them, and it's really not that big a decision for them to move to the cloud. But we'll talk about what some of them have considered the key points when they were making their decision about what was different about the cloud and what was important to them in making that decision. So that's a little bit about me. Here's our agenda for today. So we're going to keep it fairly high level because I'm sure everybody in the audience has a different perspective on this, and we can get into details in subsequent sessions with you if you care to have those discussions with us. But I'm going to talk about the characteristics, make sure we get some key terms down. We will talk about why people are moving to the cloud. That's I think, the core of what we want to talk about, so you have a sense of that. And then we'll talk about how people are moving to the cloud, and then we'll finish up with some Q&A at the end of the session here. First thing, and again, there's some generalities here, but I want to make sure that we kind of get this right out on the table. Cloud ERP. Number one, basically, you don't have to pay for the software up front, so there's a lower initial cost to buying a Cloud ERP product. Not much debate about that. But just like leasing a car, if you keep leasing a car every 3 years, and you add up the total cost over time, you will find eventually that you have paid more for cars than you would if you bought them new. Same thing, on-prem, over the long haul, over 10 years or longer, you'll find that you'll have a lower lifetime cost. However, one of the things we've seen in the marketplace here is that the cloud pricing has been evolving, as has the on-prem pricing. And for example, Oracle, for some time now, they will finance the purchase of the software. So that lowers your initial costs. So it competes with cloud more favorably. Conversely, cloud pricing, as a rule, has been dropping because they need to be able to, have that lower cost to be more competitive with the on-prem. So there's constant movement, and the costs are certainly different, but the costs aren't necessarily dramatically different. And I think the costs are getting more and more competitive, and I think you'll see that when you go out and look at cloud products and how they're priced. The next thing is, I think, functionality, and I think that's a really good area to talk about because, cloud products are next generation. We've had ERPs for a very, very long time. Most of that functionality is probably more similar than different, to be truthful. But the cloud products they're trying to create a value proposition for you. They're trying to find a way to make it attractive to move to the cloud product. And they have the opportunity to build their software brand new, and that gives them a lot of leverage that more traditional on-prem ERP systems don't have. I think a real good example of this, if you look at the cloud products, just about every single one of them can offer you native to their software. In the AP arena, they can offer you the ability to scan vendor invoices, scan vendor invoices, use an optical character reading technology to interpret that data and store it so that your AP invoice processing is much smoother. You don't have to have a bunch of paper. Nobody has to go to a scanner and scan things in. It's a much more streamlined, automated, paperless, I guess we could say that, kind of process. That's embedded in most cloud products. Now, can we get there in on-prem? Sure we can, but it usually requires third-party products. In fact, many of those third-party products are cloud-based third-party products. So that's just one example of the kind of functionality you're going to see in the cloud products. So there are differences. The business processes that are supported in the cloud are the latest and greatest. And while we keep evolving on the on-prem side, the cloud products have a different opportunity. So, sorry about this. Somebody gave me a call here. When it comes to capabilities too, I want to mention that you know, there's a new approach to how these cloud products are being put together. One of the things I think is most exciting, and I'll speak to the Oracle Cloud at this point, is the financials in Oracle Cloud are based on a database that is basically a cube. Let's just say it that way. It's based on a Hyperion cube. So the ability to do reporting out of the financials in Oracle ERP Cloud are substantially more robust than the kinds of things that we were able to do in the past on some of our on-premise applications. And that can be huge, depending on what kind of a business you run and what kinds of things you're trying to accomplish. But being able to not have a data warehouse, but to have real-time data available to you in cubes so that you can slice and dice your financial information very readily is enormous for financial functions. And that's the kind of thing that you'll see in cloud products that you really can't see in the on-prem without adding additional software. So that's big, and that's something that you want to be looking for, depending on what your business is and the importance of that. That could be a game changer for whether you want to move to the cloud. The other thing that I want to mention here is technology and vendor control of that technology. And that technology, where basically I'm thinking here of not necessarily the applications, but the technology underneath the applications, the database engines, the operating systems. While many of them are the same, especially in the Oracle space, we're finding that Oracle is taking new technology and applying it to all of their applications. Oracle has, for example, taken, some of you may not be aware, but Oracle, they bought Sun many years ago, and they have a hardware business as well as a software business. And they have really taken that hardware and their operating systems and their database management software, and they have merged it together to create a very, very integrated and efficient hardware platform for ERP systems to run on, cloud ERP systems to run on. And that's important. That's important to them because it gives them cost efficiencies, but that's important to you because as they get better and better tuned hardware, they're going to be able to offer lower prices to their customers. And I think really from my perspective is that we are really at the front end of that. I think that there's a lot of room to grow, and we know that Oracle, for example, and I'm sure their competitors as well, are making tremendous investments in making these systems more and more efficient. We know we've got Amazon out there doing their thing on this realm, and there's a lot of opportunity on the technology front. And also, and this is this last point about system controls. I think this is the first thing that people talk about when we talk to them about cloud. Some of them embrace this readily, and some of them this is categorically the reason they don't go forward, and it's giving up control. Basically, your system is going to be run on somebody else's hardware, and they're going to be tuning it. They're going to keep keeping it running. They're going to give you schedule for upgrades. There's a lot going on that they're going to take away from their customers and do for them. And some people just really struggle with doing that. And that's understandable because you have to have a reason to trust them. Now, a big player like Oracle, I think they've done their homework. They've earned that trust, as have other vendors. And I think it's important that we look at that in a very realistic way. Given their technology expertise, many of them are extremely good at this. Conversely, some people just can't see doing that, and they have to retain control of their systems. That's how they approach the problem. So that's probably the first thing when you're looking at cloud systems that you need to ask yourself is, are we ready to do that? Are we really ready to go forward and give up some of this control and rely on a vendor to do that for us? So I would say that's the first thing you want to consider. So that's just some of the characteristics. We'll move on here. Just some key terms. I don't think the ERPs have any question mark to here, but you're going to see how it fits in a little bit later in the conversation. So the applications layer is the ERP software. I want to get this right. Cloud technology, and a lot of people use different terms for that, but basically, if you don't own it, if you rent it, and it's coming to you via the internet, then you can argue that what you have is a cloud technology. And that's about the simplest way to define cloud technology, I think. So just kind of use those two criteria, and you can argue. And some of you are probably on the cloud now. You might not think of it as cloud, but if you're in a hosted environment, it's really a cloud technology, if you want to think about it that way. There's three layers, basically, that we want to talk about. And I'm going to go to the next slide that has those three layers. And we use these expressions a lot. And I want to kind of define them because I do find that when we're talking to new prospects that they struggle a little bit with this nomenclature. So SaaS, I think everybody's kind of heard of SaaS, software as a service. Application layer, ERPs, probably some of the first SaaS applications were CRM apps. You know, there's the Sales Cloud applications from many vendors now, and that's been the leader in the marketplace for cloud apps, and that's where a lot of the discussions are at, and that is where cloud technology is the most apparent because we're talking about the applications. However, there's two other layers that really do matter, and PaaS, Platform as a Service, that's one layer below the application layer. And that includes the kinds of tools, development tools, workflow tools, configuration tools that are available in the cloud environment. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. This is probably maybe the squishiest definition because depending on what vendor you're talking to, some of them are very explicit about talking about platform as a service, and some of them basically hide that and don't really bring it up. They say it's part of their SaaS offering, which at some level I think we can say that, or they argue that it's part of their infrastructure offering, but we see three distinct layers, and again, depending on what vendor you're talking to, what product you're talking about, the PaaS layer can be important. Oracle, for example, will allow you to actually buy something called the Oracle Integration Cloud Service, which is basically an integration tool. Clearly not an application, but it's a tool for basically building all of the integrations across cloud services using web services, and that's an example of a PaaS. I'll also give you another example just to give you a flavor for this. Oracle has a product called Customer Experience Cloud. Not really middleware per se, but what it is basically is they've taken a document management tool, a tool that allows you to create templates, and then you can fill in the templates with real life information, and then they store the information in a database. And they've taken this document management tool and combined it with a workflow tool so that you can get approvals on documents. And they've packaged that together, and they've created this PaaS application that you can buy and use. And and if you have the integration application, then you can integrate it with the rest of your business. So that's examples of PaaS. Again, the squishy is kind of the most difficult one to talk about. But IaaS, the infrastructure as a service, I think this is something that many of us are very familiar with. This is basically hosting. And Oracle does a good job of this. They've got 16 centers now, maybe more, where they're hosting. You know that Amazon is doing this kind of work, of course, and many other players. And what's interesting in the infrastructure space is, again, we're seeing a lot of people get involved here, and this is their starting point for cloud. And I think that's kind of an obvious thing, maybe, but maybe that's news to you. But this, when Oracle talks about how much they're selling cloud technology, a lot of what they're talking about is IaaS as much as PaaS or SaaS. And I think that's good to know. This is pretty robust technology. And again, all of the vendors who can provide it are growing this part of their businesses dramatically. There's a lot of cost savings to be had, and again, these vendors are bringing expertise. If you need somebody to tune your database, you know, who better than somebody like an Oracle? A big differentiator in IaaS that has been talked about in the past, but we don't hear as much about it now as we used to, is single tenant versus multi-tenant. And this was also a very big decision point. A lot of the early SaaS offerings were only supported on a multi-tenant IaaS platform. And there's still products where that's true. And you need to look at the particular product you're wanting to buy, and you need to make sure you understand whether it's a multi-tenant or a single-tenant environment. Anymore, most of the vendors, well, I shouldn't say most of the vendors, anymore, some of the vendors are really only offering single-tenant. A lot of people struggle with the idea that part of their systems infrastructure or part of their system software platform is being shared with other customers. And so multi-tenant has had a really bad rap, frankly. And, you know, there are concerns. I don't know that there's been any serious problems with multi-tenant. I'm certainly not aware of them. On the other hand, some people just can't abide by it, and it's an issue for them. So the vendors have responded to that, and there's a lot of single-tenant cloud applications and cloud services that you can buy. But simply put, multi-tenant is very cost-effective for the vendors. And you'll find lower pricing, as a general rule, when you've got a multi-tenant application or PaaS or IaaS level service that you're looking to buy. So know when you're looking at pricing which one of those is, and know how you feel about that. Again, I haven't seen a lot of multi-tenant problems. We don't hear about them. Conversely, you know, most people are moving to single tenant because it just feels better. It just seems like the right answer. And we can get into some details around how that affects you being multi-tenant here in just a bit. So these are the three layers. And again, you can mix and match these a little bit. We're going to talk about hybrid solutions at the end of the presentation. So let me move on. We'll get towards that. I want to talk about these particular attributes because there's many reasons to move to the cloud. And you know, I almost think this is more about an attitude than it is about measurable ROI or other quantifiable criteria. We have clients that are rushing to the cloud, and that's fine. You know, that makes sense for them. But it's basically they want to be on the latest technology. They want to be innovative, and that's a choice you can make. The risks, again, there are risks, of course, with any kind of technology, but I think it's more risk of changing and adapting than it is a risk about the actual quality of the offering. And so, you know, again, some people are rushing headlong into the cloud technology. In the J.D. Edwards space, where I spend most of my time, we have people starting to look at this. And again, most of them are going to a hybrid approach that we'll get to in a minute. But let's talk about some of the reasons that people are even looking at moving at all. And we've already kind of touched on this. Basically, all these new cloud products, they're being developed for the cloud from the get-go. And that allows them to leverage all of the new technology, the underpinnings underneath it, the development tools, and are all of the latest and greatest. It's easy to find those resources in the marketplace. You know, schools are pushing out developers who can code in these applications. They are next generation. They're being built on top of the functionality that, not being built on top, I said that wrong. They're being built with consideration for what functionality do current on-prem ERP solutions have, and how can they go one step further. And I used the example about automating the AP invoice process, and that's a good example of what we're talking about here. They have this extra feature-rich environment. Cost reductions. Again, some of this is getting normalized. We're finding that the on-prem versus the cloud is getting similar in pricing. But again, cloud will not have an upfront purchase. Okay, you're renting with monthly payments. Generally speaking, what vendors are offering are multi-year leases, if you will. So it's not typical that you'll lease for only a year. What we're seeing is, for the most part, people are signing up for 2 or 3 year leases on their cloud software. That's the reason. And one of the reasons people are looking into doing this is not just the software purchase price up front, but they're also basically they're saying that they want to reduce IT infrastructure support costs. If you don't have any servers, if you don't have any storage, you let somebody else take care of all of that, and it's all up front. They find that they can reduce their overall prices, their overall costs for infrastructure and systems applications by moving to the cloud. That's probably the single biggest driver for people moving. More relevant for infrastructure as a service than it is for SaaS or PaaS, but it's still the real driver for getting to the cloud. Okay. One of the key differences, and this is, again, for some people, this is a real advantage of cloud products. For some people, this is a real disadvantage, is the upgrades and how the upgrades are handled. I guess it's obvious, but at the risk of telling you the obvious, these software providers have the software at a data center in their environment, and they want to keep all of the software current. That is in their best interest. They want to have as few revision levels of their software as possible in their data centers, because that simply just makes it easier to manage. Makes all the sense in the world. Upgrades in the cloud environment are pretty, well, they're mandatory. They're not pretty much mandatory, they're mandatory. And depending on what vendor you're talking about, you may have upgrades multiple times during the year. For our Oracle ERP Cloud customers, Oracle is pushing out new releases about every 6 months. And let me tell you how this really works. So, we're on release 12 right now of ERP Cloud. That's the latest release. The way it works for our Oracle customers is Oracle announces the new release, and they basically give you a window in which they want to get you to upgrade. Okay? It's fundamentally 6 months. They give you a wide window to operate in. And so you go to Oracle and you basically sign up and pick a date. And the first date you pick is the date where they're going to put the new release in your development environment so that you can test and make sure that you don't have any problems. So, and again, they're very good about the documentation on what's changed, so you have some sense of what you need to do. You don't necessarily have to test everything, but you do have to do some regression testing. And then you'll have about a month in the development environment. And then once you've done your testing and you've validated that it's all your code's still working, then they will move you to production. So that's kind of a typical scenario. Clients are not experiencing large problems with the upgrades. I don't want to say it's perfunctory. I wouldn't say you can skip your testing. Of course you have to do the regression testing, but the net is it's happening twice a year. You probably have 2 events that are certainly a couple of days, maybe as long as a week, to test in the dev environment before you go ahead and upgrade. That's how we do it at Oracle. Other software vendors may not be as flexible. Depending on the product you're talking about, depending on which SaaS application you've got, some of them, particularly the multi-tenant applications, they will require that everybody move at the same time for obvious reasons. Even if there's multiple customers, they've got to move everybody at once, everybody using that environment. So their flexibility can be a little bit less. And so that's something to look at and just know and understand it. I don't want to say that it's good or bad. It's just true, and you need to address that. And you need to, as an organization, understand how you're going to support your upgrades and have a plan for that. As far as we can tell, and I'm speaking about Oracle ERP Cloud now, that's the product I'm most familiar with. As far as we can tell, Oracle's going to be doing upgrades continuously pretty much forever. We think this upgrade path is going to continue at this pace for as long as these applications exist. So it's something to really get your arms around, make sure that you're comfortable with, and of course it's not a purely technical question, and it's not a purely business question. You need to be ready to understand how you're going to support the upgrade process, because it is different. Of course, the good news in all of this is that you will actually be current. That you're kind of forced to. You can view that as a negative, but really it's a positive, because all the latest technology, all the changes that are coming, is something that you will have access to, and it keeps you moving forward. And there's value in that, and I think it's you know, again, worth considering if they're the kind of organization that struggles with this. It may not be for you, but a lot of companies are saying, I want to be on the edge or closer to the edge, and these releases are solid. They're not necessarily onerous. You know, they're making incremental changes, as you can imagine. Every 6 months, you can't wholesale change the app, and they're not. What they're doing is making incremental changes and making improvements, and you're seeing those improvements every 6 months. For some people, that is a real benefit that they're going after, and another reason why they're going to the cloud. The other thing or one other point that's important to them is security and uptime. You see the statistic on the chart. NetSuite has a 99.98% uptime. If you do the math, they're basically saying NetSuite, on average, across all of their customers, has less than 2 hours of downtime a year. As a practical matter, now that's tremendous. I mean, most of us can survive with less than 2 hours of unscheduled downtime a year. That's powerful, and that's the reason people are looking to move to some of these applications, because that's hard to do. You need people dedicated to keeping the applications running, and that's something that the software vendors are doing a very big job of. They understand that that's a requirement for people that even consider their applications, and the energy has been there. And again, our experience has been very, very good here. Clients are definitely seeing very good uptimes. Now, you guys are doing the same thing with your on-prem apps. I'm sure that most of you have very, very high uptimes because there's just no option for anything else. The question is, are you going to continue to do that? Do you want to have the staff to do that? Do you want to have, you know, the data room with the servers and the storage? Is that what you want to do, or do you feel it's better to put that into someone else's hands? That's the question. A lot of people are making the argument that when it comes to security in particular and security updates, that they feel like they struggle with keeping up with security, and that's another reason for going to the cloud. Those updates alone can be obviously a need for very timely upgrades, very timely improvements, and that's something that these vendors are staying on top of and having good success with. So, okay. And then really, what it comes down to is people are looking for return on investment, right? That's always the case. You know that. And so basically, there is a potential. There's opportunities for lowering your total cost of ownership on the software with cloud. Particularly those who want to go multi-tenant, you'll find that the pricing is very attractive. The other thing, and again, some people on this call may not be interested in this, but some might be. Basically, there is the other important point that you can shift from a capital cost to an expense cost because you're basically renting. It's a service that's being provided to you. Some people categorically don't want to move from capital to expense, and some absolutely do, and that's another reason for doing this. Those initial licensing costs, you know, we can get dispense with buying the software, and then just the idea that we've got more robust and integrated tools. The modern apps, you know, are just that much more efficient to use in many ways. The user interfaces are very flexible, very robust. We find that you know, pretty much in the cloud, all the integrations are designed to be web service real-time integrations. And whether you need real-time in all instances or not, there's a lot to be said for web service integrations. There's a lot to be said for the air tracking in web service integrations. It's the standard in the industry now, and having that integral is I think one of the real big advantages that we have. Now, can we do web services in like a JD Edwards environment? Absolutely, we can do that now in JD Edwards. But that's a change, and that's something that's relatively new in the JD Edwards environment. So that's something else to be considered. And just in general, what I think I like about the cloud apps is there's better access to information. They're designed with that idea that we need to be able to provide inquiry capabilities. We need people to be able to analyze data quickly, not just transact on data. And you know, our on-prem solutions are really built as transaction engines, and they're excellent at it. Clouds can do the same thing, but they have a host of analytical capabilities that are just part and parcel with the new generation of ERP systems. We're catching up in the on-prem world. We're getting more of those kinds of capabilities, but we're really not at the cutting edge of that, and the cloud apps will provide that. So what we're seeing with a lot of our customers is that they're moving to the cloud in a hybrid kind of solution. That's how most of us are experiencing the cloud. And I would say to you that is, you know, many people on the phone probably are in a hybrid solution. They probably have some kind of a cloud SaaS offering in their total architecture. You know, all of this was led by CRM Cloud. That has been out there for a very long time, and those applications really kind of led in the cloud arena. We have done that at Terillium. We have several customers running CRM Cloud applications, and we've integrated it into ERP, into on-prem ERP as well as cloud ERP. Some people are the tool I mentioned earlier, the customer experience cloud service offering. Some people are buying PaaS tools and using those to build spot solutions. Probably the most common thing that people are doing moving to the cloud is they're basically going infrastructure as a service, and that's the layer that they choose to go to an Amazon or an Oracle or any of the providers. They retain their JD Edwards software or whatever on-prem app they're using, and they just move the infrastructure to a cloud service. Probably over 50% of our clients at this point, with any new implementation we're doing, are going to some kind of a cloud or hosted service for their infrastructure. Very few clients are keeping that in-house. And that trend has been growing. Again, I would say over 50% of our clients are being hosted in some kind of a cloud environment. The other thing that people are doing to get to hybrid solutions is Oracle is providing all sorts of services. And the other vendors are as well, but the ones I'm most familiar with are Oracle. For example, I used the fancy word business continuity on the slide, but basically we used to call it disaster recovery. And you can buy disaster recovery capability from Oracle, where basically the off-site capability of storing your data and your systems, that's something that they can put up in the cloud and is available to you should you need to fail over to that environment. Some people find that very attractive because, you know, disaster recovery, robust disaster recovery can be a costly infrastructure project, and Oracle tries to make that very cost-effective for you to accomplish. One of the most interesting things that Oracle is doing now is they will actually allow you to, and this is for, I think aerospace and defense is probably the best example. As you can imagine, there's some security concerns about aerospace and defense industry that they want to keep everything in-house, basically everything within their firewall. Oracle will actually provide a product to you where the hardware and the software and the SaaS layer applications are all bundled together. They actually plant the hardware on your facility within your firewall, and they will still maintain the environment for you. You have to provide them the access, so there's the security of the Oracle resources to be able to maintain the environment. But basically, they can bring cloud inside your firewall. And I don't think that's a very applicable solution for a lot of you. But I bring that up just to say that there's a lot of different kinds of cloud offerings out there that can solve a multitude of problems. And so, you know, if you're going out and looking at the cloud, you can kind of get lost in all the noise because there's lots of different things being offered. But if you have a problem in 2018 that you're trying to solve, you might go looking for a cloud solution to address that particular problem. And it might not just be an ERP solution that you're looking for. It might be other things like if you need a development environment and you're getting maxed out on your servers, it's possible to just put up a dev environment on an IaaS solution that Oracle can provide. So anyway, to kind of summarize that, costs and how the costs are structured, upfront or the monthly licensing. Do you want to be managing the in-house environment, the IaaS layer, or do you want to just offload that and let somebody else do it? Do you need these modern ERP capabilities? There's advantages there. The question is it worth not so much the cost, because the cost won't necessarily go up, but the change is costly, and getting there is a reason you need to look at that hard and see if that's what you want to do. And then retain the existing IT talent, or do you want to reduce IT personnel costs? That is usually a part of the conversation very early on, and what do we want to do? What is the IT strategy? Because while you're still responsible for maintaining the business and keeping everything running, at some level, we can leverage outside expertise if that's what you want to do to improve the services you can provide to your customers. So that's what I've been seeing, going out and talking to customers, implementing cloud services. Again, I wish I had more experience with things outside of the Oracle realm, but frankly, that's where we have found our customer base the most interested. We have a number of J.D. Edwards customers now that are looking at, can we move to IaaS hosted offerings and still retain our J.D. Edwards software? And that's where we're seeing a lot of energy right now. That's what I've been experiencing, so I'm interested in what you guys are experiencing. I think, Steve, we should open it up to some questions. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Chris, very much for sharing that with us today. Definitely a lot of good information there. We do have a couple of questions that have been submitted, and I'll remind everyone that if you'd like to submit a question, just open your GoToWebinar pane and type your question in. We'll be happy to take those now. So Chris, first question here, and I may take a stab at this and then maybe give you a shot too, because I've got a little bit of experience with this. If an organization if an organization initiates these services and decides to end use of these services, what does this look like with the organization keeping their data? So, I've experienced this a couple of times with the cloud applications that I use in my role. Typically, you have to look at your contract as you're getting ready to purchase a cloud solution, but typically your contract will state that the vendor is required to return your data to you in certain formats specified in the contract within about 30 days of you terminating your service. So you do own your data in most instances, and the cloud vendor is required to return that to you. Is that what you found as well, Chris?
Yeah, well, and let me say my experience is kind of like yours. I've read it in contracts, but I've never actually experienced somebody going through it. So, but yes, you basically do own your data. I can't imagine anybody not allowing that. It wouldn't hardly make sense. The data is not valuable to them; it's valuable to you. So, and the formats were, a relational database format. I mean, that's what I remember from the contract language I've seen. So yes, you can get your data back out, but I don't have any experience with that. I don't know what that process would look like.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I've used a couple of cloud applications that I've purchased and had the data returned to me at the end of the cloud service contract as they specified. So we have seen it work. That's generally the way it happens, is they'll send you your data back in a spreadsheet or whatever format makes sense for the type of data you're talking about. Okay, cool. Chris, another question, probably better for you. Have you seen certain industries more open to adopting cloud software than others?
Well, we have. What we're finding is, and again, I largely operate in the Oracle world, and we're finding that clients in the distribution industries, more so than the manufacturing industries, are moving to the cloud. With updates coming every 6 months, the applications are really moving very, very quickly. And so last year, or this year maybe, 2017, what we found is that customers that were in the distribution industry or customers that were in the service industry, we have a number of clients that basically do project-based service work. Things like construction is a good example of that. Those customers are the ones that have been the early adopters in cloud for us. Now that story might be different for other people, but that's what we've seen. So I would say service-based industries, particularly project-based service industry customers, and then distributors, wholesale distributors, those kinds of entities are the ones that we see adopting cloud faster, and we don't see the manufacturers as ready to move. But we're seeing more movement there now. I think perhaps this time next year, it'll be a more even balance between distributors and manufacturers.
Okay, appreciate that. Well, it looks like that's all of the questions that we have submitted so far. If someone has a last-minute question, type it fast, or if we see it after the webinar, we'd be happy to send you a private reply and answer any questions you might have. So I'd like to thank all of the attendees for your time today. I hope this was a valuable use of your close to an hour here. And Chris, I want to thank you very much for an excellent presentation and sharing your knowledge with us regarding cloud and on-premise ERP systems. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.